Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor of Shadowproof.com. Welcome to this week's Dissenter Weekly. We've got several stories for you. We're excited to get to them, whistleblower stories from the past week. But first, Brian, why don't you tell them the housekeeping items?
Hey there, Kevin. Good to be with you again, and thank you everybody for joining. Just your casual reminder to make sure you're following us wherever you are watching. And just a reminder that we are 100% reader funded. We depend on people like you to give us $5, $10, $20, $25 a month or one-time donations to keep our reporting going, to fund freelance reporting, to keep this show going. We have a lot of different options for you to support us, including Kevin's fantastic newsletter, which we'll plug here at the end, the Dissenter. But before we get to that, we're going to start off with our stories for this week. First one we have up here is the rogue police force in the U.S. Commerce Department. Why don't you walk us through your first story here, Kevin?
Yeah, so I had no idea about this. There has been some reporting in the last months. Apparently, the Washington Post did a story on this unit, but I knew nothing about the existence of this. I was learning, just as you all are learning today, that apparently within the U.S. Commerce Department, so these are the people who are most concerned with U.S. trade, or if you want to call it global capitalism, these are the people who are making that policy. And under President George W. Bush, there was the development or establishment of this division called ITMS, which is Investigations and Threat Management Service. And ITMS was to provide security for the Commerce Secretary. And it wasn't supposed to be anything more than that. They have no law enforcement authority. They're not a part of the quote unquote intelligence community, as they refer to themselves, like they get together and have their book clubs. But in fact, ITMS have gone way beyond just providing security for the Commerce Secretary, engaging in criminal and counterintelligence investigations. And as I cover, this was one of the stories I did for the Dissenter newsletter this past week, as I cover whistleblowers have referred to this unit as the Gestapo, which when you get down to it, sounds like it could be hyperbole, but as I dug through the kinds of actions and misconduct that they engage in, it didn't seem that absurd anymore. What is absurd is that this rogue police force, as described, is operating within the U.S. government, that whistleblowers have raised alarm. They told an inspector general multiple times. There have been complaints passed on. Then the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation was tipped off to over a dozen whistleblower complaints and examined them. And that's what I'm referring to here in our show today. I'm referring to the report that they put out that had some amazing details about this program and its abuse. So again, they're not supposed to be doing any of this. They are not the FBI. They are not part of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They are not even in the NSA or any other institution that should have access to these classified information databases. And yet they do, apparently. They have a database of records on foreign nationals and U.S. citizens. They often retaliate against personnel who question them and challenge whether what they're doing is unlawful. And so it states clearly in the report that the unit investigated employees across the Department of Commerce and within ITMS by designating them as threats to critical assets, often without reasonable suspicion that the subject posed a particularized threat or maintained connections to hostile foreign actors. And you can imagine, based upon the global politics today, that one thing that happens with this unaccountable group is that they are engaged in race-based targeting of employees of Chinese ancestry. That's what's documented in this report in great detail. So there is an example in there that I'll share, and I have another example I'll share, and then we'll move on to the next story, because this illustrates the lawless behavior of this unit. Again, by the way, apparently people don't realize is engaged in this kind of work on a day-to-day basis, and they're allowed to do this even though they don't have any law enforcement authority at all. So you've got ITMS targeting Sherry Chen, who was a Chinese-born hydrologist who they accused of downloading and distributing unclassified information to a foreign national, which is, I believe, the Chinese government or someone associated with the Chinese government. She was interrogated for 7 hours. ITMS has no authority to bring people in for interrogations, but the agents told her that she could not discuss the interrogation with anybody, and they made her draft an incriminating statement and denied her access to counsel. And she felt like she had no choice but to write it because of the intimidation. I imagine that they were probably telling her that she couldn't leave until she wrote the statement. That statement was passed on to the FBI's counterintelligence division. It also says that an intelligence unit within the military got a copy of this incriminating statement. And then she was charged with a crime in 2014 and arrested. But then subsequently, weeks later, the Justice Department dismissed all the charges against her. It all fell apart. But the damage was effectively done. She's smeared and tarnished, slandered before her peers. And she went before a board called the Merit Systems Protection Board. And essentially, there she's able to argue that she should be reinstated to her job. And they confirmed that the information she was accused of disclosing was public. None of it was even unclassified and in a system that's not widely available to us all. So nothing happened, and they ordered her to be reinstated. But apparently the US government is still challenging her reinstatement. So the saga continues, all because of this unaccountable rogue police force and what they did here. There's also an example that is wild and even more nuts than what I just told you, because there was an elementary school child who submitted a petition to the Commerce Secretary that was signed by multiple classmates. This petition that came in was essentially asking the Commerce Secretary to support protecting an endangered whale under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And I don't know exactly how this petition was generated, but it's possible that it was done on some kind of a website and the petition was sent to all the secretaries in the US cabinet, and maybe this secretary got a copy of this petition. That's how some of this used to work, and it was automated online. So when they got a copy of this petition, what did they decide to do? Well, they opened a protective intelligence investigation into the child, and they were conducting searches for that child's name in an FBI database called the National Crime Information Center database. And they also were looking for her name in a Department of Homeland Security database. And again, without any warrant. So this is a warrantless search. And this is something apparently that happens to, I guess not just this child in this case, but we find out that this is something that this unit is doing to people who are associates of foreign visitors of the Commerce Department. So if you're seen with somebody who is Chinese or associated, I guess, with countries that are aligned with China in Asia, then I imagine your name has been searched in these databases, and they believe that they have the that they should be able to do these investigations and refer you for prosecution. Usually these are things like obstruction, conspiracy, making false statements to federal agents, and those are the kinds of things that they feel emboldened to go after people for. But they also think that they can investigate racketeering, money laundering, and theft of government property, espionage, economic espionage, and computer fraud allegations. And there's evidence in this investigation that they are taking the unchecked power that has been allowed. Again, they don't have this. It's not under any mandate, but they've appointed themselves this kind of an agency that can do these investigations. And while appointing themselves with this ability, it's noted that they are picking out targets within the Commerce Department to go after, simply to justify the kind of funding and some of the relationships that they have within government, to basically make them look like they're a capable candidate for an intelligence agency. They would like to be officially promoted to an intelligence agency, but they have not been. And they engage in tactics of jackbooted thugs by going in and as they target these employees who they believe are, I suppose, espionage actors, they'll go in and they'll search their office spaces without any warrants. They'll do lock picking. It says that they'll engage in identity concealing by using face masks, latex gloves, and shoe coverings. And so, everything about this that you read is wild. And then you ask yourself, is there anyone who can step in and stop this kind of behavior on the part of this unit called the ITMS? And it's documented in this report that the Inspector General did receive these complaints, did review them, but never concluded even the basic point of law, which is that in the organized structure of our government, they are not an intelligence agency and should not be going around conducting criminal or counterintelligence investigations against people. So I have no idea where this is all going to go. There's a ton that needs to be resolved. There are recommendations that the Senate committee made for what they would like ITMS to do, but it almost seems like it should be abolished, and the Commerce Secretary should be required to find security through some other division. As I don't know how you rehabilitate a bunch of people who have been acting in this manner for the last 15 years.
Thank you for bringing that story to us, Kevin. That's a really fascinating one. Let's go on to our next story here. We have Biden's nominee for top Pentagon position withdraws their name after whistleblower complaint. What do you have here?
His name is Michael Brown, and he is Biden administration's nominee for the Pentagon's, or was the nominee for a position called Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. He withdrew his name due to an Inspector General investigation that's ongoing as a result of a whistleblower. That investigation is into Brown's work as a director of the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit, which was established in 2015 and is headquartered in Silicon Valley. And so we're getting into the military-industrial complex here, the web of contractors that are serving the infrastructure of the Pentagon and its work. And so this is an interesting story because it shows that that Brown is circumventing, or it alleges that Brown is circumventing federal hiring regulations. This came from Defense One, by the way, that he's circumventing federal hiring regulations and gave special treatment to a half dozen employees, even tailoring job descriptions to meet their skill sets, so other applicants were eliminated. And the chief financial officer, it would seem, believes he was given this special treatment and did not deserve it. Just so people are aware, the work that this defense unit does, this defense innovation unit does, is it has about 62 civilian and military personnel who vet thousands of commercial bids to work on systems within the Defense Department. For example, the latest solicitation sought corporate solutions to hybridize the military's fleet of tactical vehicles and reduce their fuel consumption. Those are not my words. That's the Defense One. That's what they printed. And so, so like an example would be working on efficiency for systems. For those of you who deal in irony, yes, they are trying to, even as they're the biggest polluter in the world, become more energy efficient in their consumption of fuel. So anyways, it's a bit hard to focus on the actual specific whistleblower story here because there's so many things with what we're talking about, since this is about securing contracts that are probably for things that you and I would believe are a waste of taxpayer dollars. But I think it's important to amplify the whistleblowing being done here to state that essentially this person who is working, who is the lead for this unit, is essentially making it easy to hire his friends and bring them into these positions, or anybody that might be friends of his friends who would like to get jobs working here. And it also says that there is this sidestepping of contracts that exists right now, where the people will reach out to government leads saying they do not make enough money. So people at these corporations that have these contracts before the Pentagon are saying they don't believe they're making enough. And then leadership, so this is Brown, can go to the company and ask that person get paid more, which goes around the fact that they have firm fixed price contracts, and that undermines a system that is supposed to limit, ideally limit the kind of taxpayer waste that could go on in awarding these contracts. So yeah, I mean, definitely seems like this is good that this person who's engaged in this conduct is not going to be Biden's nominee.
Thank you. Next up here, we have following coverage of EPA whistleblowers. EPA tells employees not to talk to the press. What is going on here?
Yes, so you might remember last week we discussed or highlighted some of the whistleblowers. There were 4 of them that came forward, and they spoke to Sharon Lerner for a story that was published at The Intercept. And then there was also a complaint that was submitted. So we had allegations that risk assessments on chemicals were manipulated and doctored, or scientists were forced to doctor their findings in order to serve the interests of these companies that don't want to have certain warnings or restrictions or anything like that applied to the chemicals that are going to be manufactured. And so that's what these EPA scientists do. And people who have read the story, it would seem, have contacted EPA staff. They've contacted people who are not necessarily in the public relations department for the EPA, and they want to ask those employees questions about this matter. And that has prompted Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, this group that I frequently go to for stories about environmental whistleblowers on this show. And they're saying that it doesn't make any sense. Michael Regan, who is the EPA administrator, said earlier in April that he wanted transparency and that he thought that the EPA should be accessible to the press and they should be able to inform the public about what the EPA's actions are. And then now you've got this email that went out by an official to employees that I believe are within this division implicated in this story. And it says here, we've had a slight uptick recently in reporters contacting. And so I'm sending out one of our periodic reminders that, and it goes on to state that if a member of press reaches out to you or your staff, you are not authorized to answer press questions directly, and you should be, you should follow processes and I guess pass it on to the department that handles such media requests. It's not really a gag order, but it's almost a gag order. And I mean, we saw stories under Donald Trump about employees that were supposed to talk about climate science with reporters. And here it seems that they are imposing this process on their staff where they cannot talk with the press. A lot of government agencies want to function like that. They want to make sure you only talk to the flack of that agency, the person who is the spokesperson, but you don't get any answers, and they know that you don't get any answers, and they don't often confront the allegations or the concerns that you're bringing to them and asking them to answer to. And I think that's intentional. They want it to be that way. They're trying to, and so, even at the establishment outlets like CNN or New York Times, they'd rather find sources within the EPA who will answer their questions on something like this than talk to the spokesperson who isn't going to give them anything useful for their story. There's no reason to talk to that department who is authorized to answer press questions directly. So clearly, this is promoting secrecy, and it is also removing free speech rights from EPA employees if they're not able to take reporters' calls, because they really shouldn't be retaliated against, or they really just, plainly, there's no evidence of retaliation here, but plainly, they shouldn't be told they can't talk to reporters, especially when none of this is all that terribly sensitive. We're not talking about harm to people if this information gets out. In fact, we're talking about ending harm to people if more know that these chemicals do pose risks to humans and, I presume, animals as well.
Let's round things out here with our update on Julian Assange. Amnesty International responds to U.S. assurances offering to salvage extradition case. Why don't you walk us through the latest with Julian?
All right, I had a Amnesty document here. Okay, here. So this is from July 13th, or the 13th of July, and we covered the appeal last week, but this adds to the common sense response that is very necessary as the US government suggests that, hey, we're not going to put Julian Assange in special administrative measures. We're not going to send him to a supermax prison, and we can send him to Australia and he could serve his sentence. So they want the High Court of Justice to overturn the district judge's decision and allow them to get their hands on Julian Assange and bring him to US soil. So Amnesty, I'll just read because they have a pretty good statement about all of this. And it additionally raises alarm about the incarceration system of the United States, which I think is really good. And I've been trying to make that connection when I talk about this aspect of the case, about what not having authorization to extradite Julian Assange to the US because of the conditions of US prisons, what that really says about our system of mass incarceration. They say that diplomatic assurances offered by US authorities to the UK government in Julian Assange's ongoing extradition process will leave him at risk of ill treatment if extradited and should be rejected. And then they go over the assurances that were offered, and they say these alleged quote unquote guarantees are an implicit acknowledgement that conditions for persons incarcerated in US federal prisons can amount to torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment in violation of international human rights law, which absolutely prohibits transfers of persons to countries where they would be at risk of torture and other ill treatment. So, they're basically taking what anybody can figure out from a country that's saying, oh, yeah, let us try him. We understand you think he'll be tortured if he's in one of our prisons. Let me just tell you, we are willing to let another country put them in their prisons, which are less brutal than ours. And so I don't know, why should we trust a country that says that? Why should we trust a country to prosecute someone who they can't treat humanely if they are convicted of a crime? I mean, remove all this stuff about how obviously he shouldn't be prosecuted at all. But let's just say, first off, let's deal with the issue of thinking you still should be able to bring him through your criminal punishment system and deal with him in a courtroom when you can't even take care of him without torturing or cruelly abusing that person. So then they go on to say that notably the assurances also give the U.S. discretion to place Assange in a maximum security facility and impose SAMs should he, quote, do something subsequent to the offering of these assurances that meets the test for the imposition of SAMs or designation to ADX. Again, SAMs being special administrative measures. Amnesty says such latitude to alter the terms of the core assurances after Assange's transfer to the U.S. renders them irrelevant from the start, since he would remain at risk of ill treatment in U.S. detention at the point of transfer and after. The prohibition of torture and other ill treatment, including prolonged solitary confinement, is absolute and cannot be conditioned on a person's conduct. Should the UK extradite Julian Assange in reliance on such an agreement with the US, it would violate a peremptory norm of international law. So now Amnesty's leaning on the UK government and saying, who cares about the US governments and what they say? You cannot trust the US government, and the British government should know that if they extradite Julian Assange, they are actually violating human rights by extraditing Julian Assange because they can't guarantee that he won't be tortured. So, who cares about what the U.S. can promise? Britain shouldn't accept those assurances, and they cannot guarantee that there won't be ill treatment of Julian Assange. So this is a strong statement from the human rights organization that has actually paid attention to Julian Assange. He hasn't been designated as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty, which they absolutely should designate him, but they have followed his case closely, even trying to be in the courtroom for the extradition trial, but they were denied a seat by the judge, who would not recognize them as deserving of a spot in that courtroom. So we have that. And then we can just wrap things up with a few details. I'll plug my newsletter. I also want to note that I covered this past week the federal reporter shield law, which was introduced in both houses of the U.S. Congress over the past couple of weeks. Senator Ron Wyden authored the legislation that was introduced into the Senate, and then three representatives introduced the similar, almost identical legislation into the House of Representatives. And so I broke down and looked at the different parts of it, and you can read about loopholes that are actually not there right now, which is really good. Oftentimes there have been loopholes that were there from the start that empower the FBI or the Justice Department, other federal agencies to essentially get around the shield law, almost defeating the purpose of having a shield law. This is in response to the subpoenas we've heard about from the Trump administration against the New York Times, CNN, and the Washington Post, who were doing stories on the Trump administration. And it's really important. We don't have a federal reporter shield law. We have one for states. There's over 45 states, I believe, that have their own, but that doesn't protect you from federal subpoenas. It doesn't protect you from having to divulge your confidential sources if the federal government comes after you. We need something. And I point out in my story that connecting back to Julian Assange, that, first of all, Julian Assange is a journalist and he should be protected. But there are political issues that get in the way of whether anybody in our government would ever allow a shield law to cover and protect him simply because of what they believe about how he acts or how he has acted. All the prejudices that they have towards Assange and WikiLeaks, it doesn't mean that they're drafting legislation that excludes him. In fact, they're not, but they would make sure that that shield law would not apply to somebody like Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, even if his lawyers could make a clear argument that it did apply to him, because they believe that he engaged in a crime. And so that would be the struggle for. But I point out in my story that what's really good about this Reporters Shield law right now, and what we'll be watching out for here at the Dissenter Weekly, is back in 2013 when the Reporters Shield law moved through the Senate. Dianne Feinstein, who is 88 and really shouldn't be in the Senate anymore on any committee because she's senile and actually can't remember conversations that she's having with people in the Senate, important conversations. She is presumably going to be on the committee that gets to vote on whether this Reporters Shield law goes to a full Senate or not for a vote. And back when she had a chance to review this legislation, she offered an amendment that, or she backed a provision that was a specific anti-WikiLeaks provision for this. And it said that the law would not cover anyone whose, quote, principal function as demonstrated by the totality of such person or entity's work is to publish primary source documents that have been disclosed to such person or entity without authorization. In other words, data journalism or the kind of scientific journalism that WikiLeaks had done, that would be fully criminalized. So people just getting documents and publishing them for the public to access, that would not be covered by a Reporters Shield law. They were effectively excluding that strain of journalism just because of their prejudice and hatred for Julian Assange. But right now, that's not in this Reporters Shield law. And so on one hand, we should be militant and paying close attention to see that that is not included into the Reporters Shield law. But we also should be pleased that it isn't there. And as I say, there are other loopholes that are not there. So it is good. It seems like the lobbying efforts of press freedom organizations are winning currently, and I hope that they continue to keep this strong. I do not know what the prospects are of it being brought to a full vote. It would probably need to be inserted into some kind of budget legislation or some really massive piece of legislation. I can't see it being voted on individually in an up or down vote. This is a bit about like how the sausage is made in Congress, but it could be slid into something, maybe they could slide it into like funding for one of these intelligence agencies or even the Defense Department, because this does tend to involve national security matters, and you should protect journalists who are reporting on national security. That could be one way in order to get it, because they're not going to vote against funding the military. And in fact, every year the budget expands by about $100 million. It almost seems it just keeps growing and growing every 3 to 5 years. And so I don't know, maybe, one bittersweet thing they could do is include a Reporters Shield law. I don't know. Anyways, this is my newsletter at the bottom. This is the URL for it, thedissenter.org. This is where you can go to subscribe to it and receive coverage of whistleblower stories, as well as updates on Julian Assange's case. And the comments are now working. I'm very pleased to announce for paid subscribers who were upset that they could not leave comments on the site that the bug has been fixed, or the setting that was not correct has been figured out, so that people can comment on the work that's being published and they can engage in a discussion about the stories that are being published. So that's good. If you're a paid subscriber, you'll be able to comment. And thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate all of the support. I appreciate the people who are over here engaged with the show, commenting and talking to each other. It's a good group of people. I'm glad to see you all week to week. And yeah, Brian, I mean, anything Shadowproof related? Anything Shadowproof related?
Yeah, definitely. As I've been saying, been working on some freelance pieces in the background. We published 2 this week. One taking a look at a purported new vision statement for parole in Georgia, and another long read, excellent piece, a new Marvel Cook contribution on the international abolitionist movement, how people are working across languages and borders and distances and political and social differences to build vast movements against oppression. So really excellent long read there from Nicole Froyo. I recommend you go check that out. Yeah, that's about it. We've got a couple other pieces that are near the finish line that we'll be publishing hopefully in the next week or two. And I just want to thank everybody who's donated and helped us, give these opportunities to writers and publish reporting that isn't being published in many other places.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to say, but I'm not going to let him off the hook because he ruined my day. Luke Harding is back at it again, Brian. The person who brought us the fake Paul Manafort story, the mythical story of Paul Manafort visiting the Ecuadorian embassy to meet with Julian Assange. He's back at it, and it's an unbelievable story. It's a completely unbelievable fairy tale. But all I can say is he seems to have documents that are questionable as to what they prove, but it also, I have key questions about them, but more than anything, if you take a look at the documents, it's hard to believe that they're authentic. They almost look like they came from a museum, like they've actually aged, they're yellowed. And I don't know how much time has passed since this document was created and where, allegedly, if these are Russian documents, where they were stored or who. But the key question I ask, the key questions I ask, and I encourage you to all be skeptical. I mean, most people here watching this video don't believe a thing Luke Harding has to say. But, if you talk to people after today and they bring this up and they really believe that now, finally, we have the smoking gun, we have the proof, because I don't know if you know this, Brian, but this story basically confirms all the conspiracy theory that people have had in their head for the last 4 to 5 years. It says that Putin basically wanted Trump to be president, boosted him, was willing to use force to make him president, and they had a meeting about it, and they had compromise on Donald Trump from his visits to Russia. So that's even got some people believing that, like, the P tape must actually be real and stupid shit like that. But the question that you should ask is, it's 2021, like 7 months after Donald Trump, 6 to 7 months since Donald Trump left office. And this is a document about a meeting in 2016, so presumably from 2016. Why are we getting this document now? And why didn't we get this document sooner? So why are we reading it now? Like, who or what is releasing this now? And also, it mentions an appendix that is supposed to have the compromise on Donald Trump, which is what I think most people would like to read. What did the Russian government have on Donald Trump? But it's missing.
Forgot the footnotes.
They tell us that the appendix of compromise is not there. So I also ask.
I hate when that happens.
So I have to say, where is the compromise, and why was it not released with the? Yeah, I like this person who's following the show. This seems like a very. I'm going to choose to believe that it is some kind of a ploy on the part of MSNBC to save their lineup. Yeah, because they're basically, I'm imagining producers are ready to tell Maddow and maybe not Chris Hayes, but Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell and definitely Brian Williams are ready to tell them that the people just aren't watching you anymore. Yeah. You've got to go. Yeah. But yeah, it's an incredible story. It makes no sense. And then they say that they showed independent experts who authenticated the documents and said they appeared to be identical to Kremlin documents. They won't tell us who these experts are. And I think that since they're independent, they're not in the government, They're not anybody who is in a position that's sensitive. Apparently, these are people who are capable of looking at documents. I presume that they have helped other journalists on sensitive national security or military stories, maybe stories of global implications. And who are they? I want to know.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell me, I'm going to tell you it's Bellingcat.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty good guess. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, this is the first I'm hearing of this. I'm blissfully ignorant of it, and I don't, from the sound of it, know if I will be looking into it either.
I'm sorry I punctured your bubble.
You did. My pristine, my safe place from the Russia news. No, I mean, listen, I think this is going to be something that is going to be with us for the next 30, 40, 50 years. There's going to be reporters who either came up during the last administration, and this is effectively their beat now. And I'm sure it's going to be like, the JFK assassination. Every 5 or 10 years, someone's going to come out with a new book. There's going to be new theories. There's going to be this and that. We'll never get to the bottom of it because there probably is nothing at the bottom of it. I just feel like, of all the things, I was remarking to you the other day, there's just a weird feeling about the moment that we're in. And I get the sense that a lot of what is, of course, like mainstream outlets aren't always on top of the ball, but I do feel like there's a lot that's happening in the country right now that is just being purposefully left out of a lot of people's reporting. And I just find it so bizarre that outlets would expend energy and resources on this story right now. But that, having said that, I didn't read it. I'm probably not going to read it. Yeah.
You make an important point. I know we need to wrap, but we said Luke Harding's name, and all of a sudden our traffic or like the interest in our videos spiked. We like more than like we went up 50%. Like we started talking about we started talking about Trump, and we like picked up like 20 extra people.
Yeah.
No, I saw that because of the story that's going around that Donald Trump. There's a lot of people who believe Donald Trump was plotting a coup in order to save himself if he lost the election. And what's in the news right now are some conversations from generals, and there's stuff in there about the CIA and the FBI. And I logged onto my computer this morning, and I immediately thought about this thing you just said, which we had talked about previously, of this eeriness about like who people see as our saviors in this country and who are really keeping us from falling apart, because it was a bunch of coverage of like how the CIA and FBI are like the bulwarks that stood between us and Donald Trump stealing an election or seizing control and staying on for a second term. And that's really bothersome.
Yeah.
Like that those are the people. Well, first off, I don't actually believe it, because to me, the people who prevented Donald Trump from getting a second term were the people who went out and did the grassroots organizing, irrespective of the Democratic Party's wishes in states like Georgia, and didn't accept that it was close, basically believed that they needed to win these states for Biden to make sure Donald Trump wasn't elected again. And like what was going to stop a coup was like actually getting these votes, or what was going to prevent Donald Trump from being in office for another 4 years was going to make sure that there were numbers out there so that like he couldn't do anything to stay in office if he didn't want to leave. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of discussion as to like what he really wanted to do or what he didn't do, or what he didn't plan to do. But I'll say that the idea now that these institutions get to rehabilitate or fashion themselves as the people who stand between us and, let's say, a rogue president are the CIA, the FBI, the military, like that. Mm-hmm. That's really heavy for me, knowing what I know about the history of the CIA and FBI, like real, and the fact that people believe that they're going to put their hopes and faith in the CIA and FBI to save us from that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of groups out there who have histories of oppression that would look towards those who believe that the FBI and CIA are going to save us and find that to be completely nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like the same sort of like magical thinking as the QAnon people have, that there's sort of these unspoken heroes out there hiding in government who are quietly protecting us, and any day now justice will prevail, and the bad people will go to jail, and all the good people will get to live happy and free lives. And it's just it's amazing to me that this was able to turn around, not even just including the federal law enforcement agencies, but just also the tone of the conversation around police and policing in general. The way that it was sort of able to meet this thread, like you're talking about, a lot of this federal national security policing kind of stuff, I felt like was a strain of resistance liberals, that was always sort of, a tenet of that. But the way that it seems to have like united with this like turn on policing and this panic around crime now and all of this stuff, it's just very, very strange the way that it all kind of came to a head. But yeah, I guess we'll see. We'll see what comes of it.
Well, we're gonna have to do some work. Obviously, there's stuff that we'll need to do to deal with the cultural shift that clearly seems to be happening.
Yeah.
And even people who we think are on our side are vulnerable to it, of believing
Absolutely.
things about that, the idea that there is some kind of like violent crime wave that requires a kind of political response or some kind of change in the way that we, basically it's very bizarre because they want like a restoration of funding, or they want us to return to giving police, I don't know what they really want, but like the fact is that they didn't lose anything in that year. Like people believe, I think, that there was defunding of police in the last year, but that's not reflected in the vast majority of budgets throughout the country. That didn't happen. In fact, most cities resisted what the uprising was saying and went ahead and granted more money. And what's worse, this has nothing to do with talking about whistleblowers, but you've got me on this, and I think it's important. Is in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot went into the federal money that was supposed to go for COVID-19 relief and paid officers to cover overtime and paid officers to cover payroll costs that the city didn't have a budget to cover. So throughout the whole country right now, and I'm seeing stories come out from people who are complaining, money that was supposed to go towards people who were vulnerable, like homeless people, dealing with those who were out of jobs, people who were dealing with medical bills, I imagine, or were taking on costs because they were no longer in schools. They were supposed to get this relief money, and it went to police departments instead of going to these other things that was supposed to be for this money. I mean, I don't know if you remember something different, but I do not remember a conversation about COVID relief where they said it's the police agencies that are going to need this money, that they're in dire straits. I do remember things about emergency responders like EMS.
I do remember police being the primary spreaders of COVID-19 in the very early days when everybody was demanding that they stop policing, and they continued and just spread COVID all over New York City. But and yes, like there was not a wholesale defunding of police in a way that I think would make for visible dents in police behavior and the function of policing. Definitely some activists had some success and wins here and there. On the whole, it didn't happen. But I think the important thing to draw from this, and part of what I think frustrates people, is that you can bend over backwards fact checking the crime rates, and yes, they may be up 20%, but they're down 50 from 35 years ago, and this and that. But at the end of the day, that's not the level that the people who are ginning up the panic are talking about. they're using these terms and these phrases and these ideas around crime and policing and good people and bad people and safety and all of these things. They're leaning back on tropes in American culture, and I don't think that fact checking about whether the police were defunded or not is going to make any kind of progress with these people. I think there's just fundamentally the only way that a lot of people, particularly in media, can push back against the demands being made over the last decade, whether it be from Black Lives Matter, from all hosts of groups, for Indigenous people and migrants and so on and so forth. I think it's fundamentally trying to reassert back towards like an old social order and to resist sort of a newer sort of decolonial anti-racist future that is coming, but unable to use terms and phrases and thinking in public spaces that are otherwise, not acceptable, that are just would be called outright racist if they were to really get to the bottom of it. And look, that's not to say that on an individual level there aren't people who are legitimately concerned about crime. There aren't people who've been victimized by crime in the last year. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the conversation, particularly as it emanates from media and from police and from politicians, is not about statistics, and it's not about the actual ebbs and flows of crime. This is a culture war. And I really think that we're not going to get very far if a lot of us on our side are just being like, no, look at the graph, look at the chart, it doesn't say that, or you're leaving this out, or you're leaving that out. I think we have to point out the utility of this conversation on their end, how it serves as a tool or an instrument for their own political objectives, because I think that that's what this is about.
Yeah, that's a really good point to end on, because we've seen so much emphasis, especially in journalism over the last 5 years, of just put the facts first. I mean, CNN built their entire business around doing these commercials about facts and how Trump had his alternative facts, and we've got the fact-based journalism. Expecting that that's going to persuade the public to believe you're trustworthy and that it's going to get them to change. No, you're saying is important, because there are messages that have to be deconstructed, and we have to understand why they're resonating with people, so that not that we're accepting them. Obviously that's not what we're both saying here, or not what I'm saying here, but just to recognize that you have to disarm that message somehow so that it no longer has power. We have to know why this. We understand. On a simplistic level, I understand how people hear things about my city of Chicago. They say the South Side is just a war zone and people are constantly killing each other. And when is there going to be something done? When are the police going to be given the resources they need to stop that? And you go, okay, the tendency is to say, well, the facts are that they have all the resources to go respond to all of that. They don't need anything, and to put the numbers out and to show people and say, this is what they're doing. But you can also just respond to it on a cultural level and say, basically maybe you want to speak to them like you would if you were having a friendly conversation, and say, what do you know about life there in that part of that neighborhood? Have you been there? Have you taken a chance? And some of these things that we hear about violent areas, have you gone there? Have you taken a walk through there? Have you actually felt like you were under threat when you walked there? Because some things we're told about the areas we're not supposed to go. It seems intentional. It reinforces division, right? I've gotten out into spaces in Chicago that I'm told are bad areas, and I've walked, and I'm still alive today. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that there isn't violence in those communities, but it's to say that this isn't Afghanistan, where you've got Taliban and militias and the U.S. coalition forces and everyone attacking each other. These are actual communities where life goes on, and it's not. So, but oftentimes what we hear about these places, it almost sounds like they're colonized by military forces that are fighting each other.
But that's the whole thing, is that the conversation really ends up being about, do I want to believe and go along with the idea that places are, that places are shaped by their environment and the systems that operate in those places, whether it's housing, healthcare, employment, all of these things, and the social fabric that keeps cohesion of families and neighbors and things together. Almost all of those things are purposefully interrupted by policing, and the policing is what maintains certain pockets of conditions in certain places. So do you believe that it's the environment and that the social conditions need to be transformed, or do you believe that groups of people are responsible for their own behavior only and should be punished for it? And I think that is the core of the message that people are trying to have this battle about crime and the crime wave, is that people are pushing back on this message of the last 4 to 8 years of the left gaining this ascendancy of having sort of a systems point of view and having, I guess, just a very Marxist point of view in terms of like how the conditions of our environment are, shape outcomes for people. And there are people who feel threatened by that, and who are very deeply indoctrinated into the the prevailing idea, which is that it's an individual problem and you crush people in response to it. So I think that that's what we are truly arguing about. And I wish that every time that the crime wave conversation comes up, that we just get to that, because that is, all of the bullshit about homicide stats and, the line goes up and the line goes down. It's just bullshit. Nobody actually cares about that stuff. It's all proxy for the more difficult conversation.
Yeah, and it is remarkable that as we talk about these institutions that are more revered now and shouldn't be, that actually the criminal justice system has lost favor among people. So if only we could get people to make the connection that those who are doing the arrests and funneling people through that system are the ones that, like, you're mistakenly putting your
the only danger there is that I worry that people have fallen out of favor with the criminal justice system, but what they aspire for is a more vindictive one towards the people that they don't like.
That's fair.
It could go either way, and I mean, it's up to us to make the right intervention to pull people in the opposite direction and sort of into building other organizations, institutions, and relationships. But I think that if we don't, I think that's what the crime wave narrative is trying to do, is trying to pull it back. And that discontent, you're discontented with the criminal legal system, not because there's something wrong with it, but because people aren't taking it seriously anymore, and we got to get back to the tough on crime.
So let's conclude here, but I wanted to put this up because I think this is good too. What Rob's saying here was true for all of us. Facts instead of whatever serves the rich. Facts. It's so simply said, but so hard to do. And the point that I take from that is that we see a set of facts put forward that oftentimes omits other facts that need to be put along with those facts in order for us to fully understand the issues. And that's why, to pivot back to us, we want you to support Shadowproof so that we can publish all the facts instead of just the ones that serve the rich and powerful. So thank you all for watching.
Thank you everybody for the comments too. I've been following along while we've been chatting, and appreciate everybody who tunes in and who contributes and who reads and tells their friends about us. Keep it all up. It helps us go and continue to do the work. So thank you again for joining us. If you want to help out, dissenter.org, or you can go to shadowproof.com/donate, and we will see you next week. Take care.